to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're gonna flex our bag making muscles just a little bit. We're gonna try something a little bit more intermediate. Today we're gonna make the Betsy bowler bag, and this comes to us from Sew Yours. All right, so this is a newer pattern. It's very trendy. Everyone is making it. It's so stinking cute. Oh, I mean, look at the shape of this. The shape of this is classic, but also still kind of trendy. So let's go over all the details on this bag. First, look at this shape, right? It's that bowler bag. It looks like you could put a bowling ball in it, right? It's that really cool bowler bag shape, classic. On the front, we have this flap here. You can make it a turn lock. I decided to do a magnetic snap on my first attempt. I think today we're gonna use a turn lock just to see how different it is. You open it up, we have a nice little slip pocket right here. On the back, you have another slip pocket, and this just has a magnetic snap on it. Honestly, I think you could probably skip the magnetic snap if you don't really need that. It is a nice tight fit, so you could just like slip your phone and personal belongings in there. And then on the top, we have one main zipper. You could definitely make this a double zipper. I didn't do that on this version. I just have a single zipper, and then you open it up, and we have a nice big opening and a zip pocket. That zip pocket in there is completely optional. You do not have to add that. Since this is not a bag that we are going to be turning out, this is a bag that we're going to be binding. And I know a lot of you guys are like, oh, checked out, not doing binding, but just please stick with me for the binding. I'm telling you, once you do it a couple times, if you do it the way I suggest with the waterproof canvas, you're gonna enjoy it so much more. But the bag is cool, the shape is awesome. I'm using a pre-made webbing, so this is just like a seatbelt webbing that I just add some rivets to. I use that as my bag strap. The pattern does have a really cool bag strap option, so I highly encourage you to read through that, give it a try. For the sake of time though, I have been using this Tula Pink webbing, which I absolutely love, and I'll be doing that in the tutorial today as well. So you can see on this first version, I opted for all vinyl for the exterior and then waterproof canvas for the lining. And that is kind of my go-to combo, right? Because I don't have to interface anything. Like maybe a little bit, yeah, a little bit Decovil heavy, some Decovil light, but I don't have to do any woven interfacing. When you use any sort of a cotton woven material, like a quill cotton or a cotton lycra, any material that can stretch or fray a lot, you do want to add that woven interfacing to it, but that just takes more prep time, right? And a lot of times, to be honest, I'm pretty short on prep time. So I like to do the vinyl and waterproof canvas combo because it's quicker. However, I know a lot of you guys don't do that combination. A lot of you guys are trying to sew this using thinner material or other material. So I took to Patreon and I asked, I said, hey, you guys, this is the bag we're doing. What combo would you guys like to see today? And for the most part, there's a lot of options thrown out there, but for the most part, a lot of folks wanted to see cotton lycra and cork. Cotton lycra is a stretchy kind of like jersey knit material. It's often used for clothing, but a lot of times we buy it thinking we're gonna make clothing, and then we realize we don't really wanna make clothes, and now we have all this cotton lycra. What are we gonna do with it? We can use it in bags. So we're gonna use cotton lycra today, and then we're also gonna use cork, because cork is something I have a lot of, I just don't use very often. So let's use the cork today. So thank you so much to Sew Yours for allowing me to use your pattern in my tutorial. Sew Yours has some of the most unique, but not like odd, like unique, but trendy, but classic. I don't even know how to explain it. It's like the bowler bag. This is a classic shape, but it's also very trendy and unique right now. I don't know how to explain it. But they have so many cool patterns, so make sure you go check out their website down below. And get yourself some patterns. If there's another one you'd like to see on the channel, make sure you leave it in the comment section down below. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, suggestions, materials, tips, anything at all, leave them down in the comment section down below. That's so helpful to all of us, for me, for other viewers. The comments are very valuable, so if you're also kind of looking for some more inspiration, make sure you go check the comments because a lot of folks have great tips down there. I will say this, I'm not going to call this a beginner pattern, and I try so hard to figure out a way to make challenging bags beginner friendly. The only thing about this pattern, 95% of the pattern, smooth sailing. You're gonna be gliding through feeling awesome. It's just those corners right there. It's just those corners. Now it could just be the material that I'm using. We'll see when I use the cotton lycra today if that's a little bit easier. But the corners on the bottom are a bit challenging. And I'm saying this as somebody who sews a lot of curvy corners. it was still a bit challenging for me. So I know that Jessica sewing 3-4 years ago would have probably had some trouble with those corners. But I encourage you still to give it a try. If you have your heart set on making this bag, you make this bag. I will show you every single piece of the process of making this bag, and I'll throw out lots of tips. The designer from Sew Yours also has her own video, so when you purchase the pattern, you'll have a link so you can watch her video as well, and she'll walk you through how to do all this. You have a lot of resources, so if you're a beginner, you can still make this bag. I'm just saying, take your time on those corners. All right, let's get started. So for this pattern, you're gonna need a yard of exterior fabric. Now you can do it all in one fabric or you can mix it up. I'm gonna mix it up. I'm gonna use cork and I'm gonna use cotton lycra. Remember, cotton lycra is kind of stretchy and kind of dense, so we're gonna see how it works today on those curves. And then for the lining, you're gonna need 1 yard. And for the lining, I am using waterproof canvas. I love waterproof canvas because I don't have to interface it. It's easy to work with. It's just the best. And this waterproof canvas specifically is a much lighter weight waterproof canvas. The one thing I do want to note about this one is because it is a more lightweight waterproof canvas, you do have a little bit more fraying than you will on a medium or more heavyweight waterproof canvas. And that's the only thing about that is with the binding. So we're going to talk about that a little bit once we get to the binding. So here is the interfacing and stabilizer I'll be using today. The interfacing is Sew Fuse. This is a woven interfacing. You're going to put this on anything that frays a lot or stretches. So not the waterproof canvas, but we will be putting this on the cotton lycra. If you're using a quilt weight cotton or a cotton woven, you're going to want to use this on that as well. You do not have to add this to cork, vinyl, waterproof canvas. It doesn't need to go on it. You're going to need 1 to 2 yards of this depending on how much cotton lycra or quilt weight cotton you're using. Next, I have Decoville Light. Now this is just a little bit of stabilizer to firm up the bag a bit. You need about a 1/2 yard of this. And then completely optional is Decoville Heavy. You just need a very small cup, like a fat quarter would be fine, of Decoville Heavy. And again, it is completely optional. It's just for the base of the bag, which you don't have to add that if you don't want to. All right, so here is the hardware for today. First, a magnetic snap. These are rivet-backed magnetic snaps, so I can use my cam snaps press to install these. You could also use the magnetic snaps to have the prongs on the back and just spread them out like that if you'd want. Then I have some rivets. You can use rivets or Chicago screws. I get mine from Emmeline Bags. These are the medium rivets, and they're 9mm rivets with an 8mm long post. Next, you're gonna need 16 inches of a number 5 zipper. I'm using zipper tape, so I just kind of wait until I create the pocket, and then I just I don't pre-cut my zipper tape. I like to keep it a little bit long. You're also going to need an 8-inch zipper, and again, I'm going to use a number 5 zipper, and that's going to be for a lining pocket. You're going to need 2 1-inch D-rings. These are going to be for the straps on the side of the bag. So today, instead of making my own strap, I will be using this webbing. This is just this great nylon webbing from Tula Pink Renaissance Ribbons. Because I'm using webbing that is 1.5 inches wide, I'm going to be using 1.5 inch wide hardware for the strap. So you don't need to use a 1.5 inch wide D-ring. This is fine. 1-inch D-ring is fine. But whatever width your strap is, you need to make sure the swivel hooks and the slider are the same width. This pattern has a really beautiful tutorial on how to make a really unique, cool strap. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be doing that today because this is just kind of my go-to lately. So I will just be using webbing to make my strap. If you're using webbing like I am, it's personal preference how long you like to make your straps. I usually go with 60 inches long for my adjustable crossbody straps, but if you want them longer or shorter, you can add on or deduct from that. Next, I have some little adorable purse feet. You know, on the first bag, the purse feet were actually set using my rivet press. So these are not rivet press purse feet. These are just the ones you install and spread out the prongs. But there are purse feet that you can set to have a rivet backing with your cam snaps press, which is so cool. I'll have links for it down below. The only reason I'm not showing you in the tutorial today is because I didn't have this color of purse feet, but it's very cool. I highly recommend it. Finally, I have a turn lock. I decided to use a magnetic snap in the first version, but I think a turn lock is actually going to be better for this. So this is kind of an oversized one, but it's what I've got. So we're going to use this turn lock. And then I also have a sew-in label. I don't usually add these when I use binding, but I'm going to give it a shot today. And then, of course, my bag tag, which is just a sew-on. This is a leather bag tag. All right, here's all the other stuff for today. I have a wash away double-sided 1/4 inch tape. This is great for installing zippers. And then I have a super sticky 1/4 inch double-sided tape. This is great for putting something in place and you really don't want it to move, but you also don't really want to sew over this tape because it can gum up your needle. Since I'm using a turn lock today, I have a small screwdriver set as well as my Beacon 3-in-1 glue. I have a small 1" by 6" ruler, always. My seam ripper stiletto here, a marker for cork, vinyl. This works really well on vinyl because you can wipe it off easily. I don't think it'll do the same thing on cork. So if I use this today, it will just be in the seams. And then an air erasing marker, a lighter to help clean up any little bits of thread, a stiletto. I keep this at the machine with me at all times. For thread, I'm using a Tex 45 weight variegated thread. This is a little bit heavier. It works on my machine. My machine today is the Bernina 770. If your machine is a domestic machine and you're worried about the sticker thread, then go ahead and get the Tex 35 weight thread. It's just as beautiful. For the bobbin thread, I'm just using some Gutermann thread from Joann's. The needles I'm using today are Microtex 8012. That's kind of my go-to needle. If you're using thicker material, like a lot of vinyl or thicker waterproof canvas, you're gonna wanna bump it up to a 9014. Otherwise, 8012 should be fine. And then my baby. I should probably give this thing a name, shouldn't I? Because I use it every single time I make a bag. This is my Cam Snap Rivet Press. Highly recommend. Have a whole video going over it. And I have the rivet dies already installed on it. And then I also have the dies for the magnetic snaps. We're not going to be using these today, but I did want to show you the dies for the purse feet. So you can see this is the purse feet 12mm dies. And this is pretty neat because the top die looks just like a regular rivet die. See, it's smooth like a little bowl. But then you see the bottom die, it's very, like, I can stick my whole pinky in there. It's very deep. So there are very specific purse feet. You put the purse feet in here, you rivet. It's very cool. Very, very cool. Like I said, I did use it. I highly recommend it. I will show you it in another video. So let's go over the pattern pieces. First, you have 3 A pattern pieces, A1, A2, and A3. A2 is the bottom front exterior. A1 is the top front exterior. So you can see they're going to come together just like that. This is cotton lycra, and I already have all my cotton lycra interfaced with the woven interfacing. Next, you have A3, which is your flap closure. So your flap is actually going to be an exterior piece. So for me, that's this cork piece, as well as a lining cut. You're also going to cut a piece of your stabilizer. So for me, that's Decoville Light, and you're going to trim off the top edge of it by 3/8 of an inch. So I already have it applied here. I don't have any woven interfacing applied to either of these pieces, but I do have the Decoville Light already applied to the back of my cork, but I took off 3/8 of an inch off the top. That's important just to reduce bulk. I didn't do it on the first bag, but you're going to be sewing this in here with quite a few different layers, and you don't want this to be too bulky, and then you break a needle, you know? Next, we have B1 and B2. B1 is going to be your back exterior and your lining panels. So you're going to have 2 cuts of lining from this, and then 1 cut for your back exterior panel. And you're going to want to apply woven interfacing to whatever you need to. So for me, that's my cotton lycra. It's got the sew fuse on it. The waterproof canvas does not. B2 are your slip pockets. You're going to have this on the front and the back of the bag. You're going to need 2 exteriors, interfaced if necessary, 2 linings, just like that. Next, we have pattern pieces C and D. Pattern piece C is just 2 stabilizer cuts. So for me, that's Decoville Light. You're not going to apply this to anything yet. We apply this later, but you're going to have 2 of those cuts. And then pattern piece D is going to be the zipper panels. So this is the rounded part of the top of the bag with the zipper. You're going to need 2 exterior cuts. I'm going to be using cork for that, as well as 2 lining cuts. Pattern pieces E and F are to build the bottom gusset of the bag. So you're going to have 1 cut of exterior and 1 cut of lining. And then pattern piece F is just a little bit smaller. Again, we're trying to reduce the bulk in the seams. And this is going to be your stabilizer. So again, Decoville Light for me. Next, we have pattern piece G, which is the bottom stabilizer, completely optional. If you want to use purse feet, you definitely want to add this. But this is just going to give a nice firm base to the bottom of your bag, and it also helps to install the purse feet through it. Pattern piece H is to install the zipper panel on the lining. This is just 1 piece of lining material. And then we have a cut of our exterior material. I'm going to use cork for this. This is going to be for the side tabs to hold the D-ring in place on the gusset. And then I have 2 strips of waterproof canvas. Each of these are 1 inch wide, and they're about 40 inches long, and this is how I'm going to bind the bag in the end. You can see it can fray. I mean, this one's not. If you find that it's fraying a little bit, you might have gotten too close to the edge of the waterproof canvas, so you just make sure you have a nice clean cut, because this one is not fraying at all. So I think I just cut too close to the edge last time. But if you do find that some of it is fraying a little bit, you can always just grab a lighter. So you can see this little edge right here, it has a tiny bit of fraying. Gently, you don't want to burn this. If you get the lighter on this too much, it will turn black. So just boop, 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 very gently melt down the sides just like that, and that will help clean up any of the fraying. But I don't suggest running it along the entire length of your binding, because you will end up charring it, and that's not gonna be pretty. So I'm not building my crossbody strap the way the pattern does, which is sad because it is a very, very unique strap. However, I am going to just make my strap now to get it done with. I'm using this awesome webbing. I mean, webbing is, I am so grateful for webbing because crossbody straps can be kind of exhausting. But the webbing is not. So with the webbing though, what you gotta do is you gotta make sure you deal with this fraying. The edges fray a lot, so you just melt it. Now this is only if you're using polyester, nylon, webbing like that. If you're using cotton webbing, you wanna be a little bit more careful with that. But this, I can just boop, 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 boop. Melt it all down, get it nice and mushy, there we go. So I'm actually gonna build my strap entirely with rivets. I know it's a little crazy. You don't have to use rivets at all. You can just sew it. You can sew it and use rivets, which is makes it very strong strap. I find rivets are fine though. So the first thing we want to do is take one of our edges of our strap and we're going to slide it up one side of our slider and down the other side. And you can pull it down about 1 inch. And then you can just set it like this. You can put your rivets in like this. You can sew it like this, or you can fold it over again, which is what I've been doing lately. So I'm going to fold this down, which might mean you have to pull it down a little bit more because you don't want this to be too tight up here. Because whenever we use the rivets, the thing we want to make sure of is that the rivet is going to go through all 3 layers. Since I have the short layer here double folded, there's 3 layers now, and it needs to go through the center of all 3 layers. If our rivet is too close to the raw edge that's tucked inside, that middle layer right there, it could end up fraying. So we don't want it to be on the edge. We want the rivet to be nice and in the center. So I would say I have it folded under. Let's see, I have it folded under about 3/4 of an inch. So that's how much of the material is tucked underneath here. Once you get it lined up the way you want, forgot to mention this in the beginning, lots and lots of clips. You can clip the sides like that. If you'd like to, you can grab a marking tool and you can just kind of mark where you want to set your rivets. So I love this webbing particularly because of that center line. It makes it pretty easy to kind of eyeball where to put the rivets. There we go. That works. And this is an air erasing marker, so if I need to change it, it's no big deal. It'll go away. Now this is just a regular rivet press from Cam Snaps, but it has my hole punch die on it, which is what I like to use. You could also use just like a handheld hole punch. But I'm going to punch through all 3 of those layers where I marked. All right, so what you can do is you can actually remove all of this now after you have your holes punched in there. And if you'd like, we've had a lot of discussion lately about the possibility of these holes fraying over time. So what you could do is you could grab some fray check and put fray check dots just on all those little holes right there. You could also very gently take a lighter. And the thing is that the more you use the lighter, the more likely you are to get some black charring marks on here. So we want to be careful with that. But you can just very gently grab a lighter. I like to fold it like at the hole and do that. And just look at both sides. If you notice a lot of fraying on one side, you can just grab your lighter and very quickly, gently melt down the threads. There we go. So once you have that done, reinsert your slider and just refold everything. It shouldn't be a big deal to refold it all. So I'm just gonna refold it underneath again. And then I'm gonna grab my rivets and I'm going to insert the rivets through all 3 of those holes and then snap the back on. And I wait until the very end to set these just in case I made a mistake and I need to redo it. Snapping them in place like this, you can unsnap them easily. It's harder to unset them. All right, there we go. That looks great. So once you have that, you want to take your strap and you want to lay it so that the folded edge is facing up towards the top. Keep it super straight. And just straighten it all out. I can't get it all in one shot. I apologize. And then you're going to take one of your swivel hooks and you're going to put your swivel so that the swivel is going down. So you're looking at the bar. And just insert the strap through the swivel like that. Okay, pull it through. Again, really nice and straight. Everything is straight. And then you're going to fold your strap over. So you're going to fold it, keeping it straight, over to the back of your slider where the fold over is. Insert it on that same side as the fold over. Up over that middle bar. And then onto the other side. Just like that. So you can pull the slider. And now, check yourself before you do anything. When you pull on this, you should have your swivel and then the slider facing right side up and then your raw edge over here. Grab your remaining swivel and you're going to put this swivel on so the swivel is up, right? So we want the swivel to be up on the same side as our slider, just like that. And then we're going to attach this the same way we did the slider. So I'm just going to fold it over about 3/4 of an inch and then fold it down again. And that way I'm tucking in the raw edges of the webbing. You don't have to. I don't normally do that, but I've done it this last couple times, and I like the way it looks. And I think that little bit of extra bulk also helps with the rivets. Rivets like having a good thick thing to go through. All right, so now I'm going to mark placement for the rivets, and I'm just completely eyeballing it. There are plenty of guides out there that you can use to help you with that as well. Then I'll grab my hole punch, and I will punch holes where those marks are. All right, and once again, I'll remove the hardware, and I'll just check and see if I have any particular fraying in one spot, and quickly and gently melt it. All right, and then just making sure you install this on the right side, you can reattach your swivel and fold back over those edges, line them all up. I'll use the rivet to help me make sure I have it all lined up. You don't want to accidentally miss, you know, like the middle layer when you're attaching your rivet. Okay, so let's just give this a quick check. Here we go, that side looks good. Right side of swivel. Pull it around. I got this all wrapped around a bit. And there we go, other side. Nice, now all I have to do is set the rivets. This is when I have my rivet press come in, and then I just have to press them down. They don't take much force at all. You're not gonna break a sweat doing this. And then make sure if you save the slider like I did, just make sure you move the straps that don't have a rivet on them, move them out of the way. You don't wanna push through the strap. All right, there we go. Now our crossbody strap is done. You can put that to the side, save it for the end. So let's start with the exterior front. We're gonna use the flap first. Take your flap, exterior and lining, and lay them right sides together, matching up all edges. I'm gonna use clips to hold this together. Now let's go to the sewing machine and sew along the curved edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're not sewing along the top straight edge, only the curved edges. Once you have that sewn together, you can trim down the seam allowance in half. Just nice and careful not to get too close to the stitching. If you have pinking shears, this is a great place to use those. And then to help give us a nice smooth curve, I just kind of take the back of my scissors and just like super tiny. I mean, we already have an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance here, so you don't want to be too aggressive with cutting these little slits because you will cut your thread. You don't want to do that. You pretty much have to remake the flap if you do that. So let's just be careful going around, just teeny tiny little slits all the way around. And this just allows the material to spread out more. So now let's flip this right side out. If you're using a quilt weight cotton or something like that, you can iron this. Otherwise, you can just press it with your fingers. So now I'm gonna go around the entire curve, kind of pressing and rolling the material the way I want it, and making sure that the areas that I want to be kind of curvy are curvy. They don't have too many jagged, straight bits. All right, once you have the flap the way you want it, we're gonna go around the entire curved edge and the top edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just top stitching it down. Well, that is an adorable little flap. So now what we wanna do is we wanna find the midpoint along the bottom edge here. So to do that, we can just fold this in half. And I think I'm actually gonna work on the lining side for this. No, I'll work on the exterior side. So I'm just gonna fold it in half, air erasing marker or some sort of marking device that's not going to leave a permanent mark there. So I have my little mark right in the middle there. I'm gonna grab my ruler and I'm gonna measure 1 inch up from that center part. So now that dot right there, that's 1 inch up from the bottom midpoint mark, that's where I'm going to install the female end of my turn lock. So I have not used this specific style of turn lock before. So let's see how this goes. This is kind of big. So with the female ends of turn locks, you'll have 2 pieces. One piece that is a little bit prettier and it has like a center part sticking out, and then a much flatter piece. The prettier piece goes on the outside, the flatter piece goes on the back. But the flatter piece is what we use to help us mark everything. It's easier to use. So you're gonna wanna take this piece and center it on that dot that you made and just do your best to make sure it's straight. Oh, this is gonna get me in trouble. I'm not gonna be able to do this. All right, so I'm doing my very best to keep this straight. And then I'm just gonna mark, using my marker, the inner hole here, and then also where the screws are gonna go. on the sides there. Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my hole punch and I'm gonna punch where the screw holes are. Tell you what, waterproof canvas does not care about hole punches. All right, now that I have that done, I'm gonna take a seam ripper and I'm gonna rip right along that center rectangle mark. It's already disappearing on me, so I gotta be quick. And now I'm just gonna cut around that center rectangle mark to make sure I have a hole big enough for my turn lock. You know what, I just noticed that this part that needs to go through the material, the whole thing is an oval. So I don't need to do that. So this whole thing is an oval, so I have to make a hole that's big enough for this entire unit. That's fine. We'll get it figured out. All right, so my first attempts are never quite right, but it's a place to start. So now let's just take that piece and push it through. And what I can do is I can just kind of look at it and it gives me an idea of where I need to cut more. So I need to cut more along the long edges. Oh, this is gonna be so hard to keep this straight. Come on, let's try again. Push that through. I think this is gonna work actually. So it's okay if it's a little tight. You want it to be a little bit on the smaller side. So that will work. So now, let's grab the teeny tiny screws that are in here. We don't need the male end yet. And if you see any pieces of the lining that are kind of peeking through, you can just gently cut them down. The trick with these turn locks is to take your time. Don't rush through it. It takes time. Just give yourself a break. All right, so that looks like it's gonna fit. I've got my teeny tiny screwdrivers for my teeny tiny screws. And don't lose these little screws. So I'm gonna take the back piece for the female end and I'm gonna lay it on the back of the flap. Already dropped my screw. And right now I'm just kind of doing a dry fit. So I'm gently putting these screws in here. Don't push too hard, don't make them too tight. These little tiny screws are so fragile. If you get it kind of crooked and you start trying to turn it really hard and it's not turning, you will strip the little screw marks on the screw and then you can't use them anymore. Now most of the time they will come with 3 screws just in case you do that, but just do your best not to do that. Okay, so I have these screwed in just a bit. Now what I want to see is if it's straight. It's a little crooked. It's always a little crooked, but I think it'll be okay. So now what I like to do here is add a little bit of glue into the screw holes. You could also add glue behind the washer and behind the other piece on the front. I'm just gonna add it to the screw holes just to make sure the screws are stuck in there as best as possible. You know, you're gonna use this a lot. It's gonna kind of jiggle around, and as it jiggles, the screws could start coming out. So just a teeny tiny dollop of glue will help make sure that doesn't happen. If it's a little messy, that's okay. After you get the screw in there, you can clean it up. Okay, so now make it nice and tight. There you go. And just clean off any glue you have before it dries. So now let's repeat that with the other screw. All right, there we go. I'll be honest, that's not that bad. I've done worse. I've made it worse. All right, so go ahead and take the other part of your turn lock and just set it to the side for a moment. So now grab pieces A1 and A2, and you should go ahead and mark the midpoints on the top and bottom of A1 and A2. So to do that, I'm just using some scissors, making the teeniest, tiniest cut right on the corner of that midpoint. See, the thing with cotton lycra you gotta be careful of is even though it's got the woven interfacing, it still wants to stretch. So you gotta make sure it's fused really well, which sew fuse is good for. And you also just have to be gentle with it as you work with it. And then also go ahead and mark the midpoint on your flap. Okay, so take your bottom exterior piece and lay it right side up. And then take your flap and lay your flap right side up and line it up along the midpoint marks. Once you have it lined up, grab a clip and clip at that midpoint mark and then clip along this top straight edge as well. And then grab the top exterior piece and lay that right side down, matching up the bottom straight edge with the top straight edge of the bottom piece. And if you need to, use that midpoint mark to get it set up first. And so you should have all of these units clipped together now. All right, once you have it all clipped together, let's sew along this top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, so now you can just kind of flip this up so you can get an idea. Isn't that cute? That's so cute. So actually the pattern's gonna have you take this top bit and the flap, fold them both up like that so that the seam goes behind this bottom edge here. And then just press it with your iron or finger press it, whichever is easier. And now we're gonna top stitch along the bottom edge here at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now before I move on, what I'm gonna do real quick is grab my B1 pattern piece, flip over this unit I just sewed so that I'm looking at the back of it, line up the midpoint marks with the midpoint on my pattern piece. And you can see that because we're constructing this, it does get to be a little out of shape. Now, if it's not terribly out of shape, it's okay. But that is going to make it a little bit more challenging when we are constructing it all in the end if it's not the same size as the other piece. So if it's just a tiny bit bigger, taller, then that's not that big of a deal. But you can see I have it quite a bit taller up here. So I'm actually gonna trim it down. We'll see if this is a good idea or not. But on the first bag I made, I did kind of struggle with this just a little bit because this pattern piece wasn't really the size it needed to be. So and if you really want to make sure, just grab your back B panel piece and lay it, you know, wrong sides together. And it should pretty much match up. So I'm going to trim down this little sliver up top right here so that it's the same size as the back panel piece. And I'm doing this now because I just find it's easier to do now rather than after we've attached the pocket. All right, go ahead and set this to the side for just a moment. Now grab your B2 slip pockets and take an exterior and a lining and lay them right sides together. And clip along this top straight edge. Do the same for the other slip pocket. We're just gonna build them both while we're here. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and sew along these top clipped edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now turn your pockets right side out and fold them wrong sides together. And what we want to do is make sure this top edge is nice and straight. So just kind of roll it. And then I also like to go down to the bottom here and make sure that these bottom edges are lined up properly. So you can go ahead and prep both of these so that the back one is ready to go when we get there. Okay, so now let's go top stitch along both of these folded clipped edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you can pick one of these to go on the front and set the other one to the side. I think I'm going to have this one go on the front. So take your exterior front and then grab your slip pocket and lay your slip pocket right side up on the right side of your exterior front. And we're going to clip it in place so that we can find placement. So try to make sure it's all straight. I like to use the top stitching marks up here as a guide. Just get it straight. And I do find it's a little interesting that we install the flap up like that, because especially if you have a stiffer material like I do, it's going to kind of round. It's a little hard to get it down because when you push it down, it does that. I think the point of it is that once it's done being constructed, it creates a nice little kind of bubble effect. Like it poofs out a little bit like that. Okay, so you can take your flap, fold it down to help you find placement for where you're going to install the male end of the twist lock. There's no way I'm going to get this straight. I'm going to mark a mark with an air erasable marker just for guidance. But then I'm also going to measure. The pattern says it should be 1 5/8 inch down from the center of this pocket. So I can remove the clips. And then I can fold the top of the pocket in half to find the center. And mark it. And then I'm going to measure 1 5/8 inch down from this top edge to see if it's the same place I marked when I kind of did a dry fit. So I'll be honest, where I marked, it's about 1/2 of an inch lower than the 1 5/8 inch mark. So I'm just going to see what it looks like at the 1 5/8 inch mark. So see, at the 1 5/8 inch mark, it's going to be a little bit puffier, which I think is what the ideal situation is here. So mostly you just want to make sure it's not too far down. I'm going to use the 1 5/8 inch mark. I think you could get creative with that flap if you wanted to switch it around a little bit. Maybe instead of top stitching with the flap up, top stitch it with the flap down, and then that way this flap just kind of stays down. You don't have to have it curved down. It'll stay down. Something to try. So for this, you're gonna want a scrap of stabilizer. I'm using a scrap of Decoville Heavy. You could also use a scrap of vinyl, fusible fleece, anything. Just something to help beef up the installation for this male end because my material is not that thick. Okay, so we have our mark for the midpoint of the male snap made on the exterior here. Let's go ahead and take the lining out of the way. So now using that midpoint mark, we're gonna mark placement for the prongs. So I have my washer here on the fabric and I'm grabbing this real quick to see where the prongs go. They're about 2 out on each side. So I'm gonna mark placement just like that. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on my stabilizer here. I'm gonna mark the same placement. I'm gonna grab my seam ripper and I'm gonna seam rip through those slits on the exterior and also on my stabilizer. So now I'm gonna install this through the exterior material. And then once I got it through there, I'm gonna flip it over, take my Decoville Heavy, insert that over. It's a little tricky. And then I'm gonna grab my washer and insert my washer. And then I'm gonna press the prongs from the washer open. And if this is really hard to do, grab some pliers and use those to help you. Don't hurt your finger doing this. Okay, so we have that installed. That's how it looks. This is just, it's pretty heavy duty for how thin my material is, but hopefully it's okay. But the one thing we want to do before we move on is we want to protect the back of these prongs so that they don't wear down the lining. So I like using fusible fleece for this. I'm just going to grab the fusible fleece and some Beacon 3-in-1 glue, and I'm just going to glue the back of my fusible fleece. You can also fuse it if you'd like, but I'm just going to glue the back of my fusible fleece, and then I'm going to just press it on over the prongs, just to protect the lining. All right, there we go. I've got that glued in place. I'm going to flip it over to help flatten it out a bit. Yeah, I mean, it's just a really heavy closure. It probably wasn't the right one for this material, but it's what I had. So now we're gonna take our pocket and line it back up, right side up, on the right side of the front exterior. Make sure it's all straight, and then clip this in place. All right, now I wanna see how this looks. So when I close this, I mean, it's really cute. It's definitely cute. And when the bag is constructed, it will help not pull this top down so much. That's very cute. All right, so before we sew this on, I know, we take it on, take it off, take it on, take it off. Let's take the pocket off. Grab one of the Pattern Piece C stabilizers, flip your unit over, and we are going to fuse this on. Now, this stabilizer is supposed to be smaller than the unit, so do not trim your unit down to match this size here. If you'd like, you can mark the midpoints on this so that you get it centered, or you can just eyeball it. And we are going to fuse this on with an iron. So I'm going to center it and then grab my iron. Okay, so to fuse this on, I'm going to fuse it from the back, which is not ideal. Usually with Decoville Light, I like to fuse it from the front, but since I've got a lot going on the front, it's going to be better this way. My iron doesn't like touching the back of Decoville Light, so I just have a scrap piece of quilt cotton here. And I'm just going to fuse it on, and I use high heat and a lot of steam. And I can press it a little bit from the front, but only where the cotton lycra is. Try not to hit that cork. And since I already have the iron out, I'm going to go ahead and iron on the stabilizer to the back exterior panel as well. And I'm just going to iron it from the back first because my Decoville is really crinkly. It'll be hard to keep it flat on the front. So I'm just going to do a quick iron on the back, and then I can also press this one from the front without any problem since I'm using that cotton lycra. Now I'll just give it a good press from the front. So you can put the back panel to the side. Now take your front panel and lay it right side up, and then grab the pocket panel, lay that right side up, and now we're going to clip them together, lining them up perfectly on the sides and the bottom so that we can actually sew them together. So now we can go to the sewing machine and base along the edges and the bottom at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so here we go. I mean, that looks really cute. That does look really cute. So the pattern suggests if you're adding a bag tag, that is a good place to add it. So that is where we will add it. I'm gonna grab a small piece of the really sticky tape. And add that to the back of my tag. And then just make sure it's not too high up because we will have a bigger seam allowance up there. So I just have it about a 1/2 of an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch above from the top edge of that pocket. And I'm just gonna top stitch around all 4 edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to hold the tag in place. So I like to leave the tails long when I top stitch my tags on. So my top thread tails are long, the bobbin threads are long. And I'm gonna pull on the bobbin thread until I see a little loop of the top thread. And using my stiletto, I pull that top thread to the back. My goal here is to get all 4 threads, the 2 bobbin threads and the 2 top threads, to the back side of this. And once I have all 4 of them back here, I'll just triple knot the threads together to hold it in place. All right, so the front is done and adorable. Let's set that to the side. Now we're gonna work on the exterior back. So you're gonna need the exterior back panel, the exterior back pocket, and your magnetic snap. So looking at just the exterior back pocket, let's flip this over and work with the lining. Go ahead and fold the top edge to find the midpoint. I'm gonna mark it with an air erasing marker. Don't clip it with scissors because this is a finished edge. So again, I'm working on the lining side. Mark that with a marker. And then we're gonna measure 1 inch down and then just mark a dot 1 inch down from that midpoint line. I'm gonna use a scrap piece of fusible fleece here. Anything will work. I mean, your material, Decoville light, anything. We want a little bit more beef for these magnetic snaps, regardless if you're using the prongs or the rivet ones. So I'm going to grab my press and I'm only popping a hole through the lining, not the exterior, only the lining, right where I marked. And then I'm also gonna just do a quick hole through a piece of scrap fusible fleece. So these magnetic snaps have a rivet on the back side, which means I don't have to worry about it rubbing against material and ripping it at any point. So I'm gonna use the male end of the magnetic snap here because it's thinner. I'm gonna insert that so that it's on the right side of the lining, flip it over, put my scrap piece of fusible fleece over that, take the cap and just snap the cap on like that. See? Nice and easy. And you see that cap is very smooth. It should not wear through the material over time. If you'd like, you can take another piece of interfacing, anything, glue it over it to protect the material. So now all I have to do is remove the dies for the rivets off of my rivet press. And I have the die for the magnetic snap here. So the top die looks just like a rivet die. I'm gonna insert that. And since I'm doing the male snap end, I'm gonna use the die that looks like the female end. Put that on the bottom. Place this in, line it all up, and press it down. And there we go. Now we have one snap ready to go. So put the pocket to the side, and now let's get the magnetic snap for the back exterior. If you haven't already, mark the midpoints on the top and bottom of the back exterior. And now let's measure down 3 3/4 of an inch from the top midpoint line and mark. Once you have that marked, go ahead and make a hole there. And then I'm gonna do a hole in my last piece of scrap fusible fleece. Now we're gonna grab the female end of our magnetic snap and we're gonna insert that on the right side of the exterior. And then flip it over, put your fusible fleece over the back, grab a cap, and stick the cap on like that. Switch out the bottom die so that you have the bottom die that looks like the male end. And then just set this in there, make sure it's in the right spot and press down. And there we go. So now, hopefully, when we put these together, so here's the thing, mine mostly lines up, but it's not perfect. So I'm going to do my best to get this straight. And you know what I should have done? I should have marked placement for the female end by laying my pocket on top and then pressing down. That would have been better, but that's okay. So I'm just gonna try to match it up as best I can on the sides, just like this, with some clips. All right, and now when I flip it over, you can see I just have some bits down here that don't line up. I'm just gonna trim those down. This is the pocket. I'm not trimming the exterior panel at all. The exterior panel needs to stay as is. But if my pocket's just a little long, just a little over the edge, that's okay. I can just trim it down because having this too long is just going to make it more difficult with the gusset. So I'm just gonna go around and trim it up a little bit. So now I'm gonna add clips along the bottom edge as well. Remember, I don't trim the main exterior, I only trim the pocket if I need to. All right, so now let's go to the sewing machine and baste down the sides and the bottom at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, after you have it basted, flip it over again. And if you have any spots that need to be trimmed, again, only if it's the pocket, not the back exterior, go ahead and clean it up. With curvy bags like this, it's just so important that the shape is correct or else it's a mess trying to attach the gusset. Okay, so now that your back panel is done, you can set that to the side. So I forgot to cut this in the beginning, but you're gonna have a lining piece that is a rectangle, and it is for the zipper pocket. Now the zipper pocket is completely optional in the lining. You do not turn the bag out through this, so if you don't wanna add the zipper pocket, just don't add it. I also forgot to show the zipper pulls in the beginning of the tutorial. Today's one of those days. So I'm gonna grab my zipper tape here, and I'm just going to line it up with the top edge of my material, and I'm gonna make my zipper tape a little bit longer than it needs to be. And then I'm gonna grab my zipper pull and attach the pull to the zipper tape. So now I'm gonna take the zipper tape and lay it right side up, and then I have my lining. I'm gonna lay my lining right side up, and with the zipper pull going to the left when closed, I'm just gonna line it up on this top edge and clip together. So now we're going to sew along this clipped edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have one side attached, bring the other edge up to the opposite side of the zipper tape. And since my zipper tape's a little bit longer than it needs to be, I need to be careful to make sure I line up the edges of my lining properly. So I don't want this to be all wonky. I'm just going to clip that one in place. Do the same thing on the other side. Make sure the edges line up. So I'm lining up the side edges and then also the edge of the zipper tape. All right, now let's sew along this clipped edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once you have that sewn on, you can grab your double-sided tape. This is the wash away one. And we're going to add it to the very edge of the zipper tape. Right on the edge. Don't let it get too close to the zipper teeth because we don't want to see this in the end. So just add this to both long edges of zipper tape. Now grab your zipper facing, and on the back side of the zipper facing, you can just mark in lines 1 inch in from each side. So 1 inch from the short edges and 1 inch from the long edges. Now grab one of your lining pieces and mark the midpoint on the top and the bottom. Also mark the midpoint on the center of the long edges of your facing. Then lay your lining right side up and measure 2.5 inches down from the midpoint mark on the top edge. And then using the midpoint mark on your facing, lay your facing right side down so your lining panels are right sides together. And I'm just going to use some fabric tape to hold this in place. Now let's take this to the sewing machine, and you're going to stitch along the edges of this inner rectangle. And you can stitch it at a 2.5 millimeter stitch length just like normal. The biggest thing here is you want to make sure your needle goes down right in the corner. So if that means you have to raise your needle up, kind of position this, and then manually put the needle back down, you want it to pivot in these corners. And then using a ruler, draw a midpoint going along the center of the long edges here. And then coming out from the corner of your stitching, draw a line that meets that center line. Do this for all 4 corners. So you're creating like these little triangles here on the short edges. Now grab a seam ripper and starting in the center, go through both lining layers and rip right along that line, just enough so that you can get your scissors then. And cut along that middle line to the very tip of that triangle, and then cut down towards the corners. There you go. And then do this on the other side as well. Now, flip the facing through that hole and bring it to the back. And if you're using cotton woven or quilt weight cotton over here, you can press this with an iron to flatten it out. But with this particular waterproof canvas, I can actually press it with my fingers and it stays put pretty well. So the hardest part is just getting it all out here. Then just press it with your fingers. And if you need to, and I need to, use some tape to hold this down. All right, so I'm gonna set something heavy on that for a little bit. So now grab your zipper panel and you want to lay it so that the zipper is right side up, and when it's closed, it's going towards the left, okay? We're going to do this in sections. So first we're going to do the top section. So remove the paper from the double-sided tape on the top. Keep that zipper pulled down. And then grab your lining unit and line it up over your zipper tape, making sure that the edges of the zipper tape will go past the small edges of the opening, and then press down. So I know it can be, especially if you're using this material, it can be a little tricky. You have a lot of bulk here. But just remember, we're only working on this top edge first. So I'm just gonna get that top edge the way I want it. I know that the bottom edge is peeking through, or it looks like that's gonna be centered, but again, only working on the top edge. We're gonna stitch along this top edge at a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just holding the material in place. Make sure that your zipper pocket is face down. So you can see I left the tails long once again, just like I did on my tag on the front of the bag. And I'm going to pull the top threads to the back by pulling on the bobbin threads here. And the reason I'm doing this, I did back stitch once at the beginning and also at the end, just 1 stitch forward, 1 stitch back. But we're gonna be kind of connecting a lot of different segments here. And if I just keep backstitching and backstitching a whole bunch, it's gonna look pretty messy in the end. So this helps just keep it all nice and neat. So once I've got the threads on the back, I'm just going to triple knot them. And then you can trim the tails down. Okay, so one side is done. Now what we're gonna do is we're going to flip the lining pocket up. Just like that, but keep the zipper edge down. And then I'm gonna flip up the lining, and I'm going to remove the paper from the tape on the bottom edge of the zipper, and then I'm going to gently flip it all back down. There we go. So lining pocket is up now, and we're going to work on the bottom edge. So just like we did on the top, we're going to stitch along just the long bottom edge of the zipper panel at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And once again, I'm going to pull all the threads to the back and knot them for just a nice clean look. Okay, now you can fold the lining down. And looking at the front, now we can just stitch the short edges. So just gonna connect the top threads, top to bottom, just stitch along the short edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And once again, I'll pull all the threads to the back and triple knot them. All right, so now let's clean this up. If you have tape, go ahead and remove your tape. If your zipper tape is overhanging like mine is, you can go ahead and trim that down as well. Now take your lining panel and lay it right side up and press it down. If you want to press it with an iron, you can do that too. But press it down, and then we're going to fold up the lining panel on the side, and we're going to stitch down along the sides of the pocket at about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. You can see the pocket facing is overhanging a lot over here, so I can trim that down so that I can see my zipper panel better. There we go. I'll do that on both sides. Trim down the facing if you need to so you can see the edge of your zipper panel. And now just on both of these, 1/4 inch seam allowance going from the top to the bottom. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so the lining pocket's now done. You can set this to the side. So on the back of your strap connector, mark a midpoint line going along the long edges, and then fold those long edges wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line. And you can use tape, or you can press it with an iron if you're using a cotton woven. And now we're going to top stitch along these 2 folded edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have that top stitch, you can just fold it in half to find the middle, and then use your scissors and just cut right along that middle. So now you have 2 strap connectors. Grab your D-rings and just wrap the back of the strap connector around the straight edge of the D-ring, and then you can just clip along the bottom edge to hold them in place. And now you can set these to the side. So now we're going to work on the top zipper. So you can see I cut my zipper tape so that it is a little bit longer than the edge of my zipper panel. And when we attach the zipper, we're attaching it to the straight edge of the zipper panels. These zipper panels have a curved edge and a straight edge. The zipper goes against the straight edge. So take one of your exterior zipper panels and lay it right side up with the straight edge on top. Grab your zipper tape and lay your zipper tape right side down. And we're going to match it up with that straight edge and just clip together. So now let's take this to the sewing machine and baste along that clipped edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have that basted on, grab a lining piece and take your lining piece and lay it right side down. Again, making sure that the straight edge is the edge we're clipping to the back of the zipper tape. And line up your lining with the exterior piece. So my zipper tape is longer than it's supposed to be, so just make sure you don't line up the lining with the edge of the zipper tape. And clip together. And now let's sew along this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once I have them both sewn on, now I'll trim down the zipper tape so that it's the same length as the panels. And now you want to fold the lining and the exterior back, wrong sides together, so that we can top stitch them. And depending on the material you're using, this can be easy or not easy. So if you're using quilt cotton, you can press this with an iron. Otherwise, you might just have to press it with your fingers. I like to press with my fingers and then clip along the edges. And then really, I just pay very close attention to this when I'm at the sewing machine. All right, once you have that pressed down and as straight as you can possibly get it, let's top stitch along the material at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so once you have one side done, we're gonna repeat that with the other side. So take your remaining exterior piece and make sure the straight edge is on the top. Take your unit with the zipper and lay it zipper right side down. Now the zipper should be the same length as the exterior piece. So clip them right sides together. And now let's baste this together at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once that's basted on, grab your lining unit and lay that right side down on the back of your zipper tape and clip to that straight edge. All right, now let's sew along that clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then just push the lining and the exterior back so that they are wrong sides together, right sides out. And just like I did on the other side, I'm going to use clips here to help me hold it in place as best I can before I go to the sewing machine. All right, now let's top stitch along this edge right next to the zipper. All right, once you have that top stitch, now let's just do a basting stitch around the entire outer edges of this just to hold it all together. Okay, so the top gusset is now ready to go. You can set that to the side. So now let's fuse the Decoville light onto the back of the bottom gusset. So this is on the cork. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it to center it. And once again, I'm going to fuse it from the back. So I have my scrap piece of material here. And just high heat and steam. Okay, and to help make sure that my Decoville heavy is centered, I'm going to find the midpoint along the long edges of my gusset on both sides. You're going to need this anyways to construct the bag in just a little bit. And then I'm also going to find the midpoints on my Decoville heavy just along the long edges though. Okay, so now I can use those midpoints in my eyeballs to center this on the back. And then once again, I'm going to cover it and fuse it on. So using those midpoint marks, I just drew a straight line to connect them, and then I used that to help me mark horizontal lines that are 1.5 inches away from the long edges of the gusset. And now I'm just measuring 3 inches away on those lines from that midpoint line to mark intersection points. And these are where I'm going to place my purse feet. So one thing you want to think about when you're placing purse feet are their prongs. If you're using the prong kind, they stick out pretty far, so you might not want to place it, well, you just want to make sure that if it's closer to the edge, you don't place it so that these prongs end up coming into the seam allowance over here. So I'm going to make sure the prongs go out along the long ways. So when I use my washers, I'm going to center my washer on my intersection points and draw the lines for it just like that. So I'm going to mark the prong placement at each one of these corners. And then I'll grab my seam ripper, and very gently I'm ripping through all of the layers and just right along that line. But you have to go so slow. If you put too much force on it, you'll just rip the whole thing, and that would be such a pain. So just be super gentle. It's better for these slits to be on the smaller side than on the larger side. Once you have those slits marked, go to the right side of the material. Sometimes it can be hard to find them on the right side. But you just want to insert the prongs for your purse feet through the right side, so that way they look adorable on the right side of the material. You have enough interfacing back here with the Decovo Light and the Decovo Heavy. You don't need to add any more. And then just spread open the little prongs like that. So do this for all 4 of them. Once you have those installed, if you'd like, you can put some fusible fleece over them. I think they'll be okay. They're not going to be pushing against the lining too much. Now, take your bottom gusset and lay it right side up. And mark the midpoint on the short edges. And then grab your strap connectors. And we're going to take our strap connectors and line them up with the midpoint on the short edge, but we want them to overhang an inch. So I'm just going to take a small ruler here, center it, and then bring my tab 1 inch over using that ruler, and then clip it in place. So do this for both sides. All right, once you have those clipped in place, we're going to base stitch at 1/8 of an inch. Once you have these connectors basted on, take your top zipper panel and lay it right side down with the gusset bottom right side up. And let's line up these short edges. So the short edges should be the same width. If they're not, if they're a little off, that's okay. Just center them and then clip them together. And now let's sew along this edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I am using a zipper foot because we do get pretty close to this D-ring, and I want to make sure I don't accidentally hit it. Once you have those sewn together, keep it so that the lining is right side up, and then take your lining bottom gusset panel and lay that right side down right over that same edge. It should line up perfectly with everything. Clip it together. And now let's sew this again at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have that done, let's repeat that with the other side. So the side that does not have it on yet, you're going to pull the zipper panel over. These are not the same widths. You're going to pull it over and center it, or just line it up, whichever's easier. You know, for me, my zipper tape is about the same width as my strap tab, so it's easier for me to just center that together. Now let's sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once that's sewn, grab the lining, bring the lining right sides together with the lining on the top zipper, and just match it up with that short edge and clip in place. And at no point are we trimming down these little D-ring connectors here. Those stay as is, so don't trim them down. And now let's sew along this short edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, once you have that done, let's flip it out so that the lining and the exterior for the bottom gussets are wrong sides together. Isn't that cute? Okay, so now let's top stitch along the bottom edge, holding the lining and the exterior of the bottom gusset together. So I'm just gonna fold it back with my fingers. I don't have to iron this or anything. And we're just gonna top stitch right here at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're gonna do the same thing on the other side, just right below that seam. All right, once you have that top stitch, now what we wanna do is go around and base stitch these long edges together. And I find it's easiest if I give it a little prep work first. So I'm going to just add clips every couple of inches. I find if I don't do this and I just kind of wing it at the machine, what happens is the material kind of shifts around on me and it doesn't line up like it's supposed to. So by just clipping it in place first, I know it will all sew together fine. So I'm going to do this for both of the long edges for the bottom gusset. All right, now let's go to the sewing machine and baste along both long edges of the bottom gusset at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now that the gusset's done, we just need to prep the front and back panels and we can put the whole bag together. So grab the back exterior panel and lay that right side down. and then grab the lining panel that has the zipper pocket and go ahead and put the zipper in the center just to make sure it doesn't get in a seam. And line these up wrong sides together and then just clip them together. Once you have the back done, go ahead and do the same thing with the front panel. So take the, whichever one's easier, you can take the lining panel and lay the lining panel right side down, wrong side up, and then take your exterior panel and lay that same right side up, wrong side down, so that they are wrong sides together, and then just clip around all the edges. All right, once you have these clipped together, now we're gonna take it to the machine and we're gonna baste along all the clipped edges at about 1/8 to 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can do 1/4 inch if you'd like. I like to go right in between 1/8 and 1/4 inch seam allowance along all the edges just to make sure I catch the lining perfectly. There's a lot of pieces here that can be a little kind of wonky, so I just like to keep it nice and simple. And if I need a bigger seam allowance, then I can. When we sew it to the gusset, we'll use a 3/8 inch seam allowance, so you have some wiggle room here. All right, now we just have 3 pieces. All those pieces turn into 3. We have the front, the back, and the middle. So let's start with the front. Make sure everything has midpoint marks. So make sure you have a midpoint mark on the bottom of your gusset. Make sure you have a midpoint mark on the top of your gusset at the zipper panels. If you don't, just pull this together and match up the seams right there. And then line up the edges to find your midpoint on the top. You're going to need midpoint marks on the top and bottom of every panel. Okay, so take your front exterior panel and lay it right side up, and take your gusset. And I'm gonna have the zipper when closed going towards the left. If you added 2 zipper pulls here, it doesn't matter. Then you can just have it go wherever you want. But I'm gonna take my gusset and I'm gonna flip it right side down, exterior right side down, and line up the zipper midpoint mark with the top edge of my front exterior. Clip together, clip on both sides of it. There you go. Let's flip it out so that it's lining side out. So I've got the top part marked. Now I'm going to go to the bottom part and I'm going to find the midpoint on the bottom of the front panel and the midpoint on the bottom of my bottom gusset. I'm going to line those up and clip them together. Now these corners right here, yeah, those curves are pretty sharp. It's a tricky one. This is a tricky one. So once I have the midpoints marked, now I'm going to flip it over. So I'm looking at the back of the front panel, and I'm just going to go around, and every 1/2 inch or so, I'm adding another clip. I'm going to do my best to get it tucked in the way it's supposed to be. So the curves up here at the top aren't that bad. You might find this easier if you unzip your zipper panel. I'll start with the top first. And with curves like this, what I like to do is I kind of tuck in that front panel and keep the gusset pretty straight. The gusset's like a wall and the front panel is like a bowl. And I'm just tucking it in. Go along the sides. And I'm saving those bottom tight corners for last, because those are the hardest bits. All right, so I'm gonna do the other side as well. Just go along the bottom. All right, so let's work on this tight curve now. I'm just gonna kind of push it in there. And if I get a little bit of pleating on the front panel, that's okay, because I can clip into the gusset to help that spread out. So I'm just shoving it in there. If you have a lot of folding, like a big fold over in your front panel, then you're gonna wanna unclip a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, shift material around, just kind of wiggle it around so that it's not really tight in some areas, it's more kind of loose in other areas. There we go. So the same thing with the other corner. So this other corner is a lot more difficult. So I just unclip, reclip, kind of move the bubble around. All right, so I have a couple spots where I have quite a bit of rippling on these bottom corners here. So for those, I'm just gonna cut in at about 1/8 of an inch into the gusset only, so that way the gusset can kind of spread out as I go around those corners. And hopefully that will mean I don't have to have a bunch of pleats. All right, so any space you have that in, go ahead and let the gusset spread out a little bit. You don't wanna go too nuts with this and have it spread out everywhere, because then you'll have the opposite problem where the gusset then starts pleating. But it doesn't take much, just a little clip. All right, now we're gonna take this to the machine and we're gonna sew along the clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I like to sew with the gusset side up. It does get tricky. This is all very firm, especially right here with that Decoville Heavy. Just do your best and go super, super slow. You might find this easiest if you're using a zipper foot. All right, I know those corners are tricky, but this is hard to do. Let's flip it out and see what it looks like. The only way you're really gonna be able to tell if you have pleating or not is by doing this. Because there are times where it could look like there's a lot of pleating from the backside. But when you flip it out, the way the material kind of folds in on itself, you don't see it at all. So don't put yourself through a bunch of extra work if you don't have to. So let's just go along the edge, pushing out those corners. I mean, that looks really stinking cute, doesn't it? Oh my gosh. It's like a little button or something. It's just so cute. Me and my crooked label. Ugh, Jessica. Wow, that's really cute. And no, there's no pleating. And that's the nice thing about cotton lycra, is that you can actually have a little tiny bit of foldovers on the back, but because it's like a mushy material, once you flip it out, that looks really cute. I'm kind of surprised with how this turned out. That's really adorable. All right, so now let's add the binding to this edge, and then we'll finish it up with the back. So flip it out again so it's lining side out. Grab your binding. I'm using 1-inch binding, and I do find that I have to trim down just a little bit on the corners, and that's just because the material moves away a little bit. So I just trim down, like you see over here on the corner, that seam is way too big because my gusset and my front shifted. That's okay if it shifts. It doesn't have to be perfect. It will still look perfect. There we go. So that's pretty much the only place I trim down, and only if I have to. All right, so once you have it trimmed down, take your binding, wrong side down, right side up, and just wrap it around the seam, all the way around. And when you do this, it should cover all of the stitching. You should not see any of the stitching anymore. Once you get to the end, I trim down the binding just a little bit so it overlaps about 1 inch or so. That's the awesome thing about this type of binding. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's gonna look so good. Okay, so now we're gonna go back to the sewing machine. We're gonna sew on this binding at about 1/4 inch seam allowance. I do think I'm going to try to insert this tag as well. So let's just clip it in. I'm just gonna tuck it into the binding right here on the bottom, I guess. Yeah, let's just do it on the bottom. It'd probably be cuter on the side, but it'll be easier on the bottom. So I just want to make sure it's all the way to the edge so that I do catch it when I'm sewing. There we go. All right, now let's sew this at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so the binding should have been a lot easier to sew on than the original one, because that you've already got it all set. That was looking good. Okay, this is a lot easier than using vinyl. So now we're just gonna repeat that for the back. So take the back, lay the back right side up. Take your unit with the gusset, and we're gonna take the gusset that's unsewn, lay it right side down. Make sure you match up the midpoint on the top of the back panel with the midpoint on the top zipper part. And let's just clip those together. And I'm just gonna flip it like this. And then match up the midpoints on the bottom. Clip it together. And then just clip it around the entire edge like we did with the front. I always like to start with the top and the bottom, and then I save these sharp corners for last. All right, once again, I have a few sections on these corners here that are just a little too tight, so I'm gonna clip into the gusset, and only the gusset. I mean, just the tiniest clip. You really don't need to go more than 1/8 of an inch in. All right, now let's sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You can see I use a lot of clips. Keep your scissor nearby, go slow, use a stiletto. You can do this. And again, I'm gonna be sewing with the gusset side up. However, you can see this is, when you do the binding, this is what you get, like a bone. You gotta smush it down. I know you don't wanna do it, but you're gonna have to smush it anyways to turn it right side out. So just smush it down to make it easier to sew all this, okay? So this one was okay as well. I feel like we might have a little tiny pleat. Actually, I can't even see it. See, that's one of those things. I don't know if you can tell, but like right here, you can see that in the video. See that? See that like crease there? It's like, oh, that's a pleat. It's gonna look terrible. You don't see it. You don't see it at all in the front. So make sure you always check that. Don't just look at that and go, oh, let me unpick it and fix it all. There might not be anything to fix, you know? Okay, so now, again, my corners definitely shifted down here, but that's okay. Just gonna trim them up a little bit. Make sure I caught everything. I know, it looked so perfect when it was just all taut just a minute ago, didn't it? Now it's all crumpled. It's okay. It's okay. It'll look good again. So now, once again, I'm just going to take my binding, right side up, wrong side down, and I'm gonna wrap it around that raw seam and use clips to hold it in place. I'm gonna do this around the entire edge. All right, and just like on the other side, let the edges overhang a little bit, so like cross over each other. There we go. Now let's just sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're done sewing the bag. Alright, once you have the last bit of binding attached, let's just flip this out. And it can always be a little challenging flipping these out because they're so structured. So just be careful and don't pull on the edge of the zipper very much. Okay, and just make sure you push out those corners so they look real nice. You worked hard on those corners, so make sure they look the best they can. And then push out around the curve on the top edge. This is such a cute bag. Look at that. Close up the zipper. Oh my goodness, that's adorable. Let's grab the strap. Yeah, this strap looks good with it. I like this strap. And let's attach it. And there we go. The bag is done. This is adorable. All right, how are you feeling? Is your arm hurting a little bit? I know my left arm hurts a little bit after doing some of these corners because I'm like holding the bag so firmly to make sure it doesn't lose control and go off the side of the sewing table. but the work is worth it. I'm just saying, the work is worth it. And you know what is so funny? I rarely reach for cotton lycra for bags, again, because it takes more time to interface it. I don't always reach for the cotton lycra, but every single time I do, every single time I make a bag with cotton lycra, I always say, why do I not make more bags with cotton lycra? It feels so nice. The colors are so vibrant. This cork looks amazing. Oh my goodness. And I do love that we did the turn lock on the front. I think that looks fantastic. This turn lock was an easier one to do too versus some of the more fun shapes. This one was just an oval, so a little bit easier to do. And this strap, I know that the strap in the pattern is like thebomb.com, but this strap with this bag, oh my goodness, I don't even know if I'm gonna sell this bag. I might just keep it. It is so pretty. So overall, I would say that the cotton lycra and cork combination was easier than the vinyl combination. So if you're getting started, see the reason, here's the thing about curves and material. Here's the thing, okay. So with these sharp curves, in my opinion, you're gonna have the hardest time with the pleating if you're using a quilt weight cotton, cotton woven. You know what I mean? Like the regular stuff you're gonna get at a fabric store. That material, it is thin and it doesn't have any give, right? And so it'll fold on itself very easily. And that's my experience with these sharper corners. The quilt weight cotton is going to give you the most trouble with pleating. Vinyl is great because vinyl is just kind of like, where do you want me to go? I'm going there and I'm not moving. And if you want to pleat it, it's like, I'm not going to because I'm too thick. You can't make me. So vinyl is a little bit better with curves because it is so structured that you can't really make it pleat. You know what I mean? Cotton lycra is kind of in the middle here because cotton lycra is thinner and more loosey-goosey and stretchy, you know? We have the woven interfacing on it, so it doesn't actually stretch, but it still wants to. It's still stretching on the inside, you know what I mean? So it wants to do that, but because it's more fluffy, it's not as thin, like actually thin as quilt cotton. It's a little bit more poofy and fluffy. Even if it looks like it's pleating when you're sewing it, when you turn it out, you can't see any of it. It kind of like fluffs itself out. I don't know. So if you're a bag maker, try all these different things. You got to try it, okay? Like do what you're comfortable with, but then try other things because you might think that the quilt cotton, the cotton woven is the easiest and the best and that's what you're sticking to. And if that's how you like it, then by all means do that. But you won't know if you like the cotton lycra better unless you try it, right? So I do encourage you to give it a try, especially with curves. Cotton lycra actually works really well with curves, which is surprising. I mean, it's not surprising. It's made for curves, right? All right, so I just realized I did not show this bag to you guys on in the beginning, so I'm gonna go grab a step stool and show you what this looks like on. Alrighty, I am 5 feet 4 inches, and I'm a size small normally. So this is what, this is a good size. That's a good everyday size. You know, it's not like a little tiny bag that you're just gonna take out to the party. This is like your everyday running around bag. Look at this strap, right? Oh, I love this bag so much. I love this bag so much. So I hope that you love making this bag as much as I do. If you make it, please let me know. I know a lot of you guys have already made it. It is a newer pattern, so it's kind of like flooding the socials right now. But if you make this bag, let me know. I want to see how you guys switch up the material because you can switch up the bottom, the top, the backs, the flaps, all the things. You can switch it up to make it look like a completely different bag. That's one of the things I love about the pattern. The pattern actually has a bunch of pictures at the end of it with all these different versions so you can get inspiration. That's where I went for inspiration on both of my bags, so let me know if you make it. I think you guys are gonna love this bag. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.